It's The Log. I'm Charles Purcell. I want to follow up today on the program we did on whether or not the U.S. is divided, if we're a divided nation. I took the position that we are not all that divided. Largely, Americans agree on the major issues. Now, of course, nothing is unanimous, but when I say largely agree, I mean 60%, 70%, 80%, sometimes 90% agree on particular issues regarding health care, gun safety, minimum wage, tuition debt relief, issues on the economy and taxing the rich. I mean, there's so many things. Americans are largely in agreement. But that agreement is not reflected in our current politics, and especially in the halls of Congress. And as much as we would all love to just turn our backs on Congress and on politics, and many of us do, we say, oh, they don't really matter. Real change comes from us. Well, yeah, it does come from us, but it has to be enacted into law. It has to have some teeth. So here in part 2 of this conversation, I want us to think about what our attitude should be going forward regarding politics. I'm going to set aside the argument that politics doesn't matter. I'm not going to even entertain that. You can continue to believe it if you want to, but we're not going to advance that notion today. No, for the sake of this conversation, we're going to assume that it does matter. It matters quite a lot. The people we send to Washington and the decisions they make have real and lasting impact on our lives. Absolutely. That's the assumption I'm making here and going forward. So there are two things happening here. One, we are being preached to, we meaning lefties, progressives. That's me. I don't know if it's you. It's me. And I and people who think like me are being lectured to about how we're now supposed to get along with everybody. Joe Biden is the big healer. He's going to heal the nation. And as part of that, we have to bring everybody along. He's going to be an American president. He's going to represent the people who didn't vote for him. Well, of course, that's all fine. That's all true. Those are all nice little platitudes. But we're talking about real politics here. We're talking about strategies. We're talking about how to get things done. So I need to push back on this whole get along thing. And then that leads us naturally into, more specifically, the case for progressives, the Justice Democrats, AOC, Bernie, the Squad, others who got elected just in this recent election. The instant it became apparent that Joe Biden had won this election, the arrows started flying. With the left of this nation, specifically the left of the Democratic Party, targets on their backs. All right, so let's start with this get along thing. Joe says we have to get along. You got social media friends posting happy, cheery little memes about how we're all in this together and we have to get along, find common ground. It all sounds so pleasant, so nice, right? Our political opponents are not our enemies, we're told. Yeah, I understand the appeal of that. I do. But we have to remember what we've just gone through. The embrace of fascism, the cruel disregard for life itself. When a great political faction says right out loud, the virus, people are going to die. That's just the way it is. The racism, the misogyny, the abuse. We can't, on the day after an election, just say, oh, that's all right. Okay, let's all just get along now. Here's a post that's going around. My friend Josh shared it. Watch out in the coming days for the abuser's playbook. Requests for unity and forgiveness without an apology or acknowledgement of harms caused, followed by blaming anyone who doesn't want to make nice with those who've caused pain. Yep, exactly right. Exactly right. Joe Biden might have vanquished the Orange Menace, but by no means did he vanquish what's coming to be known as Trumpism. And I don't want to use that term too easily or too often. I'm really hoping that's not a term that sticks. I hope it goes away real quickly. So I'm not going to use it anymore after that. That's the last time I'm going to use that word. But the fact of it remains. And the fact that it needs to be squashed remains. As we need to remind ourselves often, this so-called ism didn't start in 2016. The right wing of this country has a long history. I'm going to recommend to you Rick Perlstein, if you're not familiar. Historian whose particular beat is the modern conservative movement, has a very important study of Ronald Reagan. And to understand the right in this country is to really see the straight line you can draw from Reagan to our current time. The busting of the unions, the religious, almost maniacal dedication to individual liberty over social justice, to the point where social justice becomes a dirty word to the right wing. The resurgence and the flowering of misogyny, of racism, the fanatical allegiance to gun rights and the Second Amendment, so-called Second Amendment remedies. And how has the right wing established such a dominant hold on American politics since 1980? A steady and rapid rise in influence and power. Well, I would contend that one of the major reasons for that steady incline has been the response of the Democratic Party. Democrats were so freaked out by his success that they felt they had to get along. They had to go along. So by the time Bill Clinton comes along, there's a Democrat back in the White House, but like no other Democrat we've ever seen before. This so-called third way. No FDR Democrat would recognize Bill Clinton, let alone the progressive Democrats of the 20s and 30s. No, we got a whole new thing going on now, and it's because we just have to get along. We have to look at political realities. We have to compromise. And we have to keep reminding ourselves that, yes, even though compromise is a necessary component of any political structure, of course it is, it became the defining characteristic. It was always one step forward, two steps back, one step forward, two steps back for the Democrats after every election until they just became a watered-down version of the Republicans, which also then gave the Republicans license to keep lurching further and further right. Ronald Reagan didn't redefine the entire American right wing on his first day in office. No, he just opened the door, and they've been walking through that door ever since. Some people talk about 2016 and the Orange Menace as though it just came out of nowhere. And Mitch McConnell and Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham and Rand Paul and the rest of them, as though they just showed up out of thin air. They just appeared one day. No. They were the inevitable result of the steady march that began in 1980. They were inevitable. They were predictable. And the Democrats who keep asking us to get along and go along and compromise are culpable. And we have to stop this cycle. We have to stop it. And today's situation is even more urgent than ever because it's come to a point where we don't just differ on policies. We differ on reality. Truth has been destroyed. The get along crowd keeps giving us this false equivalent about how both sides are guilty of seeing the other as the enemy. They cite all these studies and these statistics, this research that shows that, parents wouldn't want their kids marrying someone of the other party. And it's equal numbers on both sides. Well, yeah, because one party has gone off the cliff. It's no longer even just about issues. That fight was bad enough. One party has abandoned facts, abandoned truth. It started with George W. Bush, and it's been growing in the right wing ever since and reached full bloom with the Orange Menace and those who would turn him now into an ism where truth no longer is relevant. The most outrageous lies, the most outrageous propaganda and disinformation is now the coin of the realm on that side of the spectrum. It is full blown. And anyone to the left of that extreme, still living in a world of reality, shouldn't be expected to just play nice, to just get along with the extremists. We're told to be kind. We're getting these sanctimonious lectures. Well, remember how it felt in 2016 when you lost? It felt bad, didn't it? Well, that's how they're feeling now. Be kind. No. When we lost in 2016, the reason we filled the streets, some of the largest demonstrations in the history of the United States, were people demonstrating their disdain for the newly elected president, not because they lost, but because they knew who this guy was. And everything about the last 4 years proved them right. He was a danger. He was a menace. So now, when the right-wingers go out and demonstrate against Joe Biden and fill the streets and yell and make signs and have their demonstrations for all this voter fraud, well, their protest requires them first to create a fiction, to create lies, to create Nazi-level propaganda, disinformation. Joe Biden is a socialist who's going to turn us into Venezuela. The Orange Menace actually won this election, and all we need to do is uncover the massive voter fraud that the Democrats are guilty of. Their 2020 protests are based on lies and fiction. The left demonstrations of 2016 were based on facts and truth that have all been borne out in the last 4 years. In many cases, even worse than the worst fears from the left. So don't give me this equivalence about how, you feel bad when your candidate loses. So be kind. There's no equivalence to be had here. Now, I'm not saying we have to purge every last Orange Menace supporter. We don't have to have a Detrumpification. We don't have to put people in camps. But on the other hand, we cannot embrace one little bit of their ideology, their embrace of fiction, of delusion, their open racism, open misogyny, homophobia, religious bigotry. You can't compromise with that. Which brings us to the progressives. Let's get into some nuts and bolts here about how we need to go forward from this moment. Let me start with just a kind of a personal story. When I worked in public radio, a couple times a year we'd have, if you're a listener to public radio, you know about pledge drives. Oh yeah, pledge drives. We got to raise some money. Well, when it came time for pledge drive, our programming completely changed. It's even worse on the television side. I was on the radio side. It's even worse on the television side, where they pretty much abandoned all their regular programming. And now you got financial advice, and you got Deepak Chopra, and you got doo-wop concerts. And you got all these really odd, kind of sensational, almost infomercial, late-night, weird programming, all during the pledge drive to bring in a certain demographic. Why do you think it's wealth management seminars suddenly? And we did this on the radio side too. Our programming would just change drastically. It didn't even resemble what we'd do the rest of the year. And I would argue my fight was, let's just do really, really great programming year-round and fundraise off the strength of that. Let's be honest about who we are. What is this game we're playing in order to raise money? Because I began to notice that programming that we did during Pledge Drive started to bleed over into our regular programming after the drive was over. I was a producer of a news talk program. And over time, while I worked there, We lost Fridays. No hard news. None of our regular stuff on Fridays. We would start the weekend early. And our Friday shows had to be light and fluffy and fun, and they had to be about cooking or gardening or entertainment. And the reason I tell this story is because I think it's directly analogous to policy versus politics, right? Election time is like pledge drive time. Candidates have to sell themselves in order to get your pledge. So they become something that they're not normally. They have to show you what they think you want to see. And then once you do that and you get their pledge and you give them their tote bag, then you go back to govern. Then you go back to policy. But a lot of that politics is going to stick. You're going to be branded with that. There are going to be expectations put on you from that campaign that then filter into your work as a legislator, as opposed to creating good and effective policy. Now, you might accuse me of being naive. You have to put on a little show to raise money for public radio and television. You have to do a little song and dance to get elected. You got to put on the cowboy hat in Texas. And you have to eat cheese and bratwurst in Wisconsin and corn on the cob in Iowa. And you have to yell about the evils of socialism to get those Cuban immigrants in Florida. That's just politics. You know, the cowboy hat and the corn on the cob are fine. That's all just good fun. But I'm going to stick with the idea that good policy is good politics. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the Justice Democrats have been proving that. And they shouldn't have to apologize to anybody. This coalition that was necessary to defeat the Orange Menace included lefties like me. It included progressives like AOC and Bernie. This coalition had to include everybody. Moderates like Joe Biden, conservatives, and even some Republicans like John Kasich. That was the whole coalition. But the minute this coalition could claim victory, then the attack dogs came out. John Kasich actually accused the Justice Democrats of doing more harm than good. Didn't even give them credit. As a part of this coalition, let me say right now, I give everybody credit. Thank you, John Kasich. You got us a half a dozen Republican votes. Thanks. Thank you, conservatives. Thank you, Lincoln Project. Thank you, moderates. Thank you, suburban women. Thank you to the lefty radicals who held their nose and said, well, okay, we got to vanquish the Orange Menace. Cornel West, Noam Chomsky, Angela Davis, they got on board and brought their constituents with them. Bernie and AOC and the Justice Democrats got on board. Everybody gets their share of the credit. But now is not the time to get all strategic and think very politically and strategically and, oh, what ideas are going to win and which ideas are going to lose and which is going to give us the best chance to... No. Policy is politics at this point. Everybody just advocate for your own policies. Fine. Go ahead. I'm fine with that. John Kasich, you have an idea of how you think the world should work? Advocate for that. Don't jump into the political game here. Don't make it a 4-year election cycle. The election is over. Advocate for your positions. Advocate for your policy positions. I welcome that debate. Everybody just advocate for your policy positions at this point. Stop playing politics. Good policy is the best political strategy. And the policy initiatives advanced by Justice Democrats, Bernie, AOC, the Squad, others, are not only good for America, good for the world, they're popular with voters. Bold climate initiatives, green infrastructure, and the jobs that will generate, universal health care, tuition debt forgiveness, paid family leave. I have a couple of years to make a decision. I've made a public vow that if I voted for Joe Biden, it would be my last vote for a Democrat. So I've got 2 years to see what happens in the Democratic Party. If the Democrats embrace their progressive caucus, which, by the way, is up to, at last count, 97 members. I'm not sure what it is after the election here. It's the second largest caucus in all of Congress. People like, of course, Bernie Sanders, Raul Grijalva, Auntie Maxine, my man Mark Pocan from Wisconsin, also Gwen Moore of Wisconsin. You may know some of these names. Katie Porter. Of course, you got AOC and the squad. Yeah, congressional Democrats have to take a long, hard look in the mirror and decide who they want to represent. They have to decide if they want to keep doing this old one step forward, two step back thing. Joe Biden was one step forward. The election of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris was one step forward. An important step, I'll give you that. We had to vanquish this once-in-a-lifetime menace. But if they decide to take those 2 steps back again, this compromise with evil, this try to get along for the sake of getting along, then I'll make good on my promise, and I will go ahead and, without apology, campaign against them. On the other hand, if they embrace the progressives, if they embrace the Justice Democrats and redefine the party in that image, I'll give you another shot. I mean, they proved in 2020. The Justice Democrats ran 12 candidates, and they won 10 out of those 12 races. Good policy is good politics. Justice Democrats running unapologetically. I've used that term several times, and I think it's central to the whole conversation here. If you're running from the left, don't apologize for it. Don't hide from it. The way Joe and Kamala always have to hide and get all coy about the Green New Deal or about health care. Oh, can't quite, no. Are you a socialist? Oh, no, just laugh. Talked about that before. No. Stop apologizing. Stop hiding. 10 out of 12 successful races. And not just in Brooklyn. No. Raul Grijalva in Arizona. Rashida Tlaib, Michigan. Ilhan Omar, reelected in Minnesota. Cori Bush in Missouri. Now is the time to talk about this. I know they're still counting votes, but now is the time. The Democrats have to establish this now. Before we know it, Joe's going to start appointing his cabinet. And I know high on his list of priorities, he wants to get the health team in first because of the virus, and he wants to get his economic team established right away. If we see the same old revolving door between Washington and Wall Street, if we have this well-intentioned but ill-fated attempt to cross the aisle and bring in Republicans, put John Kasich in the cabinet, not going to be happy. This starts right now, today, and the clock is ticking to the 2022 midterms, when a lot of us are going to have a big decision to make. AOC talked in her big New York Times interview recently about how she thought about not even running again. She's getting no support from the Democratic Party. She said she ran again because she wanted to prove a point. Well, first of all, she wanted to serve. She wanted to continue to serve her constituents. She wants to fight for her causes. But she also wanted to prove that 2018 wasn't just a fluke. And she proved it. And Ayanna Pressley proved it. And Rashida Tlaib proved it. And Pramila Jayapal proved it. And all the newcomers proved it. So this is a really crucial moment in history right now, as we speak. The gestation period here of this new Democratic administration and how Congress is going to treat the Justice Democrats and the Progressive Caucus. I'm calling for a transformation of the Democratic Party. I mean, it's a lot easier if the progressives can just take hold. I mean, that would be my first choice. The best of all options is to get new leadership and a new direction in the current Democratic Party. I can live with that. If the party can be transformed, I'm with you. I mean, for the love of God, Nancy Pelosi is 80 years old. Thanks for your hard work. Thanks for your dedicated service. Here's a gold watch. That's enough now. We need new leadership. We need youth. We need new ideas. We need progressives. We need Justice Democrats. Because if that doesn't happen, then I'm going to be looking for other people to vote for. And I'm asking right now, Justice Democrats, progressives, there are a couple different ways you could go here. You could be like Bernie, declare yourself an independent, run as an independent, caucus with the Democrats, and then continue to try to take over from that position. Or just completely bolt and form a new party. I'd be first in line for the new Justice Party. Okay? That's a pretty good name, right? The Justice Party. With the way affiliation is fragmented now, like 25% of Americans identify as Democrats. About 25% identify as Republicans. And the rest don't identify. It's a great time for a third party. I would love to see the entire 97-member Congressional Progressive Caucus just bolt. Just bolt. Maybe you can bring some with you. So yeah, form a new party, AOC. I'll follow you over there. I'm with you. The Justice Party. Or maybe you could resurrect the Progressive Party of the 20s and 30s. My grandfather, a proud member of that party, a proud founding member of that party here in Wisconsin. Or you could join an existing party, the Greens, or one of the socialist parties, the DSA. There's Democratic Socialists of America, there's the Democratic Socialist USA, there's Judean People's Front of Judea. I don't know, there's so many different social, but coalesce the socialist parties. Yeah, we get a couple of high-profile names, get a couple of stars to headline a Democratic Socialist Party. It'd be like Tom Brady going to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Get some star power. All of a sudden, an also-ran is a contender. I think this is the time for it. Again, it's best if you can transform the Democratic Party. That's the quickest route. You're already there. You're already in the halls. But if you can't, this is it. This is it. And without apology, without running from who you are. That's why I kind of like the idea. My personal favorite here is coalescing the couple of different socialist parties, bring them all under one banner, get you some star power like AOC and some others. I think the time is right for that. The time is right to declare loudly from every podium, yes, I am a democratic socialist. It's not a word to be afraid of. This is what it means. The majority of people under 50 in this country are just fine with it. They're happy with it. They prefer it. Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden are all going to be dead in a couple of years. Let's get this thing going. And from here forward, no more of these silly games every 4 years. Every election cycle where we got to pretend we're something we're not. We have to hide who we are. We have to shuffle and compromise and put on a little show. Nope. Good policy is good politics. State your policy goals. State your political philosophy. Run on it. Honestly, boom, the future. That's what I'm looking for. I'm Charles Purcell. Monday through Friday on your favorite podcast platform. Thanks for listening.